Protests have been held almost on a daily basis in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian youths have been the Israeli occupation. The majority here believe that what goes on is still a popular uprising. This is why a third intifada should be clearly declared by all Palestinian factions.
It's very clear that pent-up anger has been growing among Palestinian youths in recent years, and it has grown more following the settlers' burning of the Dawabsha family and the recent raids by settlers and Israeli soldiers on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's an instinctive awareness among these youths that they cannot wait anymore, and that it was the time to move, to rise up.
University students have recently been at the front lines of the clashes, and passionate student activists have been organizing a protest against the Israeli occupation. The Palestinian University of Birzeit in the occupied West Bank was the center of political activity and the site of dramatic clashes between Israeli troops and Palestinian students in both the first and second Palestinian intifadas, while Israeli troops directly patrolled Palestinian cities and erected checkpoints at the entrance to Birzeit. Today, the Israelis have been pushed to the outskirts of the cities, but those youths and university students gather outside the Israeli checkpoints and hit them with the stones to show their resistance. They say they will continue resisting Israeli occupation until it comes to an end and until they get back their normal lives.
We always have hope that we will succeed in liberating our lands. Even if the soldiers continue to arrest more university students, the Palestinian cause will never weaken. Almost every day, scores of our university students gather and head to the Israeli checkpoints to throw stones at Israeli soldiers. Many of our colleagues, and among them girls, have been arrested and injured, but we will not stop. We have real hope.
Over the past weeks, Israeli soldiers have been shooting and killing Palestinian youths for alleged stabbing attacks carried out against soldiers or settlers. Palestinians say that Tel Aviv has been trying to convince its allies that the Palestinians are the attackers. Palestinians today do not see any way to end the Israeli occupation other than continuing their struggle and confronting the Israeli troops regardless of any further violent measures by Israel. Palestinians, mainly the youths, insist that the only response to Israel's ongoing atrocities in the occupied territories is continuing the uprising against the Israeli occupation and Tel Aviv's apartheid policies. As a result of this, the No Palestinian Intifada continues to gain momentum in the occupied West Bank. For the Sunrise, this is Mona Qandil, occupied Ramallah.
To discuss the ongoing Palestinian Intifada, we have two guests in the studio with us today. Nawaf Al-Tamimi is a Palestinian journalist and writer who's worked in journalism and media for the last 20 years and is a regular writer and commentator in a number of Arabic media outlets. And Hassan Al-Khatib is an independent journalist. Hassan was also on the Viva Palestina convoy to Gaza in 2010. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show today. Thanks for coming in. Nawaf, if I could start with you. What do you make of this current intifada and where do you think this is going to lead?
I think the current intifada is just a new episode in the Palestinian struggle, Palestinian resistance, which is started early 20s of last century. Since that time, even before the establishment of the Israeli state, the Palestinian shows that they will resist until they get their freedom, until they end this occupation. So it's another episode.
How significant an episode? You say it's another episode.
Yes.
But is it any more significant than other episodes? Do you think it's going to achieve something concrete?
Yes. It is a kind of a proof that this new generation of young and youth Palestinians, they are not going to give up, and what they call it, the illusion, I call it the illusion of peace process, which is started about 25 years now, and they tried to sell it to the Palestinians, and they try to make the Palestinians give up all kind or sort of resistance. It's failed. This generation, which is, we call them the Oslo generation, shows that no, nothing will satisfy them but the end of occupation.
Yeah.
All negotiations, or what they call it peace talks, all this process, it's not enough for them because it achieved nothing and it gave them nothing. So the only way for them is to resist.
Okay.
And this intifada is, as I said, is the proof for that.
Hassan, how significant do you think the current events are?
Well, this particular intifada has achieved certain things which other particular protests over the past few years hasn't. We've seen in 2011 when there were calls for a third intifada in May at the back of the Egyptian and Tunisian protests and what was going on in the Arab world. And that really, I don't think, had its big impact as people were expecting. And over the years there's been, other particular protests that were taking place, but this time around I think it's quite different. I'll give you an example. For instance, when the Israelis stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque, I think the Palestinians, when they rose up and they started to protest, they were making a bold statement. They were saying to the Israelis, look, this is a red line you cannot cross. And all the other persecution and the oppression that was going on around what was happening to the Palestinians, again they were making a statement saying, look, we're fed up with what's going on with our lives. All this peace process, are not working. So we're making this statement now, and I think it's also put the spotlight back into the Palestinian issue. And there's been a lot of sympathy this time around, because what we're witnessing now is different for what we were witnessing before. Because now the international community are seeing the Palestinian children bleeding to death on the streets. And surrounded by Israelis laughing and mocking them.
Yeah.
This has really damaged Israel's reputation.
But Hassan, do you worry that, given that it's led by the youth, as we saw with the Arab revolutions previously, if it's led by the youth, that usually means it's not going to succeed, because the older, wiser heads, ultimately you need older, wiser heads to develop a strategy. Youth are always outmaneuvered, aren't they?
Well, we'll talk about the old wiser heads, but when we talk about the youth, I think this is very encouraging, because if you look at, for instance, what the Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said in one of his speeches not long ago, he said how this was a sign that the Palestinian youth haven't forgotten the Palestinian cause. They still have hope in liberating Palestine. So this is actually a very encouraging thing. And two, yes, they're young, they may not be in positions of power, but they have influence and they can be very influential, because they're putting pressure on Palestinian politicians, they're putting pressure on Israeli politicians, and they're also putting pressure on the international community to do something about the persecution of the Palestinian people. So they are having an impact.
Okay, we'll continue this in a few minutes' time. As usual, we've been keeping across what's been trending on social media regarding Palestine. So here's Camelia Shambayati with a roundup.
Hi and welcome to our social media roundup. I'm afraid there's been a series of distressing videos circulating out of Palestine during this latest surge of resistance. This video, uploaded on YouTube, shows an Israeli soldier yelling in Arabic through a loudspeaker and threatening Palestinians in the West Bank that he would kill them with tear gas. This was after Israeli soldiers reportedly stormed a refugee camp near Bethlehem and indiscriminately fired tear gas and flash grenades at Palestinians throwing stones. And this next video also exposes the brutality of Israeli soldiers as they violently attack Palestinian journalists and fire pepper spray directly in their eyes in order to cover up their crimes to the world. It is reported that Israeli soldiers committed more than 100 violations against journalists in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, in October alone. Next up, these photos show Israeli agents disguised as Palestinians and drawing their guns on them after infiltrating a group of Palestinian youths. They jumped on one protester, beat and arrested him, and then carried him down the street. This is now the second time in less than a month that Israelis have been caught on camera using undercover agents to capture Palestinian protesters. And finally, this short clip shockingly shows Israeli soldiers shooting down and killing an elderly woman driving her car. Thawat al-Sharawi, a 72-year-old Palestinian woman, was the victim killed while she was driving her car. And she was apparently on her way to lunch at her sister's house. And that's the end of our roundup. Please check out our Facebook and Twitter accounts for more news on Palestine.
Nawaf, I must ask you about the tactics that the Palestinians are using in this new intifada, because I've been reading the Israeli media quite a lot over the last week, and they're portraying it as a fight against terrorism, basically, a war against terrorism, and they're specifically honing in on the knife attacks and perhaps cars being rammed into soldiers and other Israeli citizens. What do you make of the Palestinian tactics?
Look, the Palestinians in West Bank and like in Gaza, they are under sanction. Maybe nobody knows or nobody talk about the sanction in West Bank, but there is a real sanction there. There is no arms, there is no means of resisting, but always to be creative. In 1987, first Intifada, people, they used stones. In the second Intifada, people, they used another method when they could, you know, cross the borders, you know, to the Israeli cities, etc. This time, they are trying to use the knives. And the knives is simple. It's not that weapons, you know, which is will destroy Israel. But in the end of the day, it will make the Israeli feel unsafe wherever he went. And this is actually a message more than it's a kind of tool to fight with.
Yeah.
It's a message where we want to tell this Israeli, the settlers in specific, that there is no safe place for you but to get out of Palestine. Whatever the Israeli, whatever the government, whatever the Israeli army trying to sell the idea of it's a safe haven for you in Palestine, no, it's not. So you can expect the death or expect to be injured anywhere, you know, in the bus, in the street. And even if you look to the geography of these attacks where it happened, that means you don't have a safe place where to hide. Some of these attacks happened in Tel Aviv, some of them in West Bank, some of them in the north of West Bank, some of them in Jerusalem. So everywhere, as long as, and the message, as long as you're occupying our land, there is no safe place for you to go.
Whether you're a soldier or a citizen, normal citizen?
Look,
no difference.
It's a myth, you know, when we call a soul in Israel, when we call a soldier or a civilian. There is no civilians in Israel. Everyone in Israel is a soldier. Everyone. Even the settlers, you see them on the streets, on the bus stop, everywhere, you know, they're walking around with their arms. So there is no civilians in Israel. All of them, they are soldiers, and all of them serving the army in somehow.
Okay. Hassan, you alluded to it earlier on. This is led by the youth. The leadership, Mahmoud Abbas and others, don't seem to be... They're keeping a distance from this intifada, aren't they? What do you make of that?
I think Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have been quite appalling in the way they've, you know, approached this intifada. And in fact, they don't want to see an intifada. They want to, you know, die down these protests because Mahmoud Abbas thinks that the diplomatic process is the way forward.
Still?
And,
Still?
Really? Yeah, still.
Okay.
Even though there are people within Fatah who have made the conclusion that it's not working. In fact, even for the last decade now, the Palestinian Authority has systematically have had operations aimed at the Palestinians to prevent them from creating, you know, this intifada and from challenging the Israeli, you know, occupation.
Is he a kind of irrelevant figure now in the West Bank? Or
I think if you ask a lot of Palestinians, they're very fed up with their leadership. I don't think they have a very, you know, strong, you know, backing from the Palestinian people. People like Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have promised the Palestinians for years now that they will have their own state, that they will, you know, finally end the illegal settlements in the West Bank. They've been giving so many promises again and again and again, and that they put so much hope and faith in these peace processes that the people have pretty much given up on this and have said, well, you know, if we're going to carry on listening to this leadership, which is, you know, have very close ties with America and Israel itself, they're not going to achieve much. So that's why we're seeing that the youth are bringing up on themselves to do something about it, because they're not seeing any, you know, good leadership.
Okay, we're going to conclude this discussion in a few minutes' time, but we're going to move on for the time being. As usual, we've been compiling the latest news and events from Palestine that you probably didn't see on the mainstream media. Here's what we came up with. of Palestinians mourn the death of Ibrahim Scarfi, who was shot and killed after he rammed his vehicle into an Israeli soldier in the West Bank. Scarfi's action was part of the Palestinian resistance uprising or intifada against Israeli occupation and oppression. In a bid to deter more such attacks, Israel's parliament has passed a law toughening penalties against Palestinians for throwing rocks at soldiers and other Israeli citizens. France's High Court has declared that the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign against Israel, or BDS, is illegal and said those who promote it are guilty of inciting hate or discrimination. This means that in France, demonstrators can call for a boycott of any country in the world except Israel. Last year, during Israel's war on Gaza, France also banned pro-Palestinian demonstrations. BDS campaigners say they'll ignore the ban, and all the French authorities have done is to give their cause more publicity. US President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have met for the first time since relations deteriorated over the Iran nuclear deal. Mr. Netanyahu is seeking a boost in annual US military aid for Israel, and the talks were expected to pave the way towards an increase from $3.1 billion a year to $5 billion. Relations between Netanyahu and Obama were strained over July's nuclear deal with Iran, which was bitterly opposed by Israel. And finally, Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem Al-Quds have been responding to a social media campaign to sing Mawatini, a popular Palestinian national song.